Okay, Adam, we are live.
Perfect. Thank you, Du. Good morning, everybody. Want to welcome all of you to another special meeting. Today is Monday, August 16th, 2021, and the meeting has commenced at 10:04 a.m. We are here for the special meeting agenda for the Ad Hoc Advisory Committee for the Rainbow Municipal Water District and the Fallbrook Public Utility District reorganization proposals. So welcome everybody, happy Monday, and we will move on to item number 2, which is our roll call by our commission clerk.
Good morning. Brian Albright.
Here.
Brian Albright. Jack Beebe.
Here.
Rachel Cortez.
Here.
Rachel Cortez.
Here. Sorry.
Gary Croucher.
Here.
Here.
Nick Canettis.
Here.
Tom Kennedy.
Good morning, Tammy. I'm here.
Morning. Sandy Curl.
Here.
Lydia Romero.
Here.
Nick Serrano. I don't see him, so he's absent. Kimberly Thorner.
Here.
We have a virtual quorum with 9 present and 1 absent. So ends the roll call. 1 absent.
Thank you, Tammy, much appreciated. We will move on to the next item, which is item 3, the agenda review by the moderator, which is myself, looking it over. I don't have any changes at this time, so we will swiftly move on to item 4, which is today's public comment. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to provide comments on a non-agenda topic germane to the advisory committee. Each comment will be limited to 3 minutes. I will ask Tammy, our commission clerk, at this point in time, if there are any members of the public that would like to speak at this point.
We have no registered speakers at this time.
Is anyone else hearing sort of this second echo, or is
Yes.
something wrong in my brain?
Yes, it's echoing like crazy.
Yeah, I'm slightly hearing that too. Is there anything that we can do with that, or
We can simply ask everyone to mute themselves if they're not speaking. I'm not sure where the source is coming from.
It looks like everybody's muted, unless I'm missing somebody. So I think it sounds a little better at this point in time.
It's not you then.
Well, that's good. Okay, no public comment from any of the members of the public. So that addresses item 4. We will now move on to our business items for the day, which is items 5A. 5A is the approval of the action minutes for our last meeting, July 12th, 2021. The advisory committee has reviewed draft minutes prepared by our commission clerk for the July 12th, 2021 special meeting. The draft minutes are in action format and recommended for your approval at this time, and entertain any motion necessary.
Motion to approve, Croucher.
Second. Lydia.
We have a motion by Gary Croucher and a second by Lydia Romero. Tammy, could you please do the roll call vote, please?
Sure. Kimberly Thorner.
Aye.
Nick Serrano is absent. Lydia Romero.
Aye.
Sandy Curl.
Yes.
Tom Kennedy.
Aye.
Nick Canettis.
I was not able to attend the last meeting, so I'll abstain.
Gary Croucher.
Yes.
Rachel Cortez.
Yes.
Jack Beebe.
Yes.
Brian Albright.
Aye.
You have 8 in favor and 1 abstaining. The motion passes.
Thank you, Tammy. That concludes item 5A. We will move on to item 5B, which is our consultant report from Dr. Michael Hanneman. He will be providing his ongoing analysis and an update to his review. Today discusses a number of topics, which 4 of them are highlighted on the agenda in regards to the London Motor Cost Benefit Report, a water reliability update, the Delta Reliance, and any potential exit fee discussion. So I will pass the baton over to Dr. Hanneman, and it is all yours.
Thank you. Good morning. If you can actually go to the second slide, which lists the topics. Thank you. These are basically the topics Adam listed, plus a description of what I'm going to do between now and our September meeting. And I just want to emphasize, I'm still refining some of the numbers and checking on them. So everything here is a draft. And I'm absolutely open to comments and suggestions and criticisms and whatever, both at the meeting today and in emails or whatever, or communications with Adam. So let's go to the next slide, which just says a little bit about the report. And I've mentioned this before. I'm not going to produce 3 separate documents. I sort of started out in that direction. But what I'm going to do is to produce an integrated report, which will have an introduction with sort of context information. And I'm not quite sure how the chapters will be organized. There's background data, and then the particular topics like rates or reliability draw on that background information. So it'll be integrated rather than just 3 documents stapled together. A chunk of it, much of it will be sort of a technical document. There'll be, of course, an executive summary. But some of it, I'm thinking, will be in a question-answer format, and I'm going to show you an example for part of what I'm doing today. And if that seems like a bad idea, then I won't do it. And if it seems okay, I will do it, but I'll do it only where I think it fits in. There's a lot of issues or topics that are works in progress where I've asked questions and I'm getting back data, but I will have pulled everything together for a complete draft for a meeting next month. That'll be a draft, and I'll expect and want comments and suggestions from you, and then it'll be revised for the October meeting, which is the schedule we've been talking about now. I think since May. So next slide. So I'm going to, for the next few slides, do this as question and answer. And also, so first question, if Fallbrook-Rainbow exit from the authority, won't they still end up receiving the same water from Metropolitan through the same turnouts on the same Metropolitan pipes? In other words, won't everything be the same? That's the question. My answer is no. It won't be completely the same pipes, and it won't be the same water, and I'll explain. So next slide. So why won't it be the same pipes? Well, the answer is that Fallbrook-Rainbow receives some of their water from turnouts located on pipes owned by Metropolitan, but they also receive water from turnouts on pipes owned by the authority. And the breakdown in the last 4 years was 35% of the water that Fallbrook got came from authority pipes, whereas it was 76% in the case of Rainbow. So some water, a lot of water comes from metropolitan pipes, but some water right now comes from authority pipes, which of course would change. So the pipes would not be identical. Some of them would be, others wouldn't. Next slide. What about the water? Would it be the same water? So, the molecules of water may be the same, but the legal identity of the water is different, and that's very common with water rights because you have in lieu exchanges and substitution. But it's basically, in one case right now, the water belongs to, or I'll use the word owned, is owned by the authority. And in the other case, if Fallbrook and Rainbow are served by, right now, so you have water belonging to Metropolitan and supplied by Metropolitan, and you have water belonging to the authority. And you can think of these as two colors of water. They come from different sources. Because they come from different sources, there's different degrees of reliability, there's different pricing, and there's also a different reliance on the delta. And I'm going to talk about part of that now, but in the report for next month, I'll lay out all these differences. Next slide, please. So how is, if you have water that the authority delivers to that the authority buys from Metropolitan and Metropolitan's pipes deliver it, how's that different from water delivered by Metropolitan through Eastern? Well, it's the same, when they go through the pipe. Well, the key thing is you have two different wholesale agencies with different portfolios of water. You have the authority, whose portfolio of water, its base supply, is Colorado River water from canal lining and from the QSA, from purchase from IID, and desal water from Carlsbad. And the authority also gets supplemental water from Metropolitan. So the authority has water from the Colorado River, desal water, and water from Metropolitan. Metropolitan has two main sources, the Colorado River and the State Water Project. So to start out, each wholesaler has a different portfolio. Next slide, please. Now, so I just said the authority portfolio doesn't include State Water Project water. Well, the authority gets some State Water Project water, but that comes from Metropolitan, and State Water Project is part of Metropolitan's portfolio. But here's the key point. Metropolitan is delivering water in two different capacities, in two different roles. One is what I'll call a supplier of water. The other role is a conveyor of water. Next slide. So as a supplier of water, Metropolitan owns the water it's providing, and it owns the infrastructure. And it charges for the water, and it charges for the use of the infrastructure. That's Metropolitan's role as a supplier of water. But essentially, in the case of the authority, since 2003, Metropolitan has also taken on a role as a conveyor of water. It doesn't supply the water, it allows the use of its pipes to move the water, to convey the water. In that case, it's not charging for the water, it's just charging for conveyance, because technically it's not supplying the water, it's just supplying the conveyance. So this is the key distinction, Metropolitan as a supplier and Metropolitan as a conveyor. Next slide, please. So come back to the fact that Metropolitan moves molecules of water that originated with the State Water Project to the authority. But this happens in two different roles. And so these are not the same thing. When a Metropolitan is supplying water that it owns, some of that is from the State Water Project because that's part of the Met's supply base. When Metropolitan is acting as a conveyor of water, the water it's conveying comes from the Colorado River, not from the State Water Project. Now, sometimes Metropolitan substitutes State Water Project water for QSA water when it's conveying it. So the molecules actually came from the north, from the Delta. But that's being done as a replacement. It's what's called in new water, and this is very common in water systems. If you have a well-connected water supply system, you may be supplying customers over here, and the source of water is over here. There's a distant source, but sometimes for operational reasons, you supply these guys with this water, not that water, physically just because operationally, that's the best way to move water. But the key thing is this: when Met is substituting State Water Project for QSA water, canal lining or IID transfer water, technically that is QSA water, and that water belongs to the authority. It comes under the authority's right to QSA water, has nothing to do with the State Water Project. And so even if the actual molecule is a State Water Project water, it doesn't count as that. It's a replacement for a like molecule of QSA water. And so this distinction between Met as a supplier, supplying State Water Project, and Met as a conveyor, not legally conveying QSA water, that's, I think, something of the essence. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. So before 2003, Met was only a supplier. Since 2003, it's partly a supplier and partly a conveyor. And the conveyor role has increased over time because the delivery of water has ramped up starting in 2003. Next slide. So it started, it took 10 years to go from 10,000 acre feet to 100,000 acre feet. It took another, whatever, 6 or 7 to approach 200,000. And from next year onwards, it's going to be 200,000. This is the, I should have included the canal lining waters in this also. I'm sorry. So the Met is going to be conveying 200 and whatever is 78,700 acre foot from now on as a conveyor. If you look at in the last 4 years, the amount of water that Met has delivered to the authority, 38% is its own water delivered as a supplier, and 62% was water that Met was delivering as a conveyor, but not the supplier. So it didn't own that water. It was selling conveyance, not water. Next slide. So let me now segue to the London Motor report. And I circulated a draft document. I'm just going to go over a few points. So with regard to, and that report, as you recall, looked at or estimated the costs and benefits of water authority service to Fallbrook and Rainbow. With regard to benefits, it equated the benefits of membership in the authority for Fallbrook and Rainbow. It equated them with the share of water that came from turnouts on the authority's pipeline as opposed to turnouts on Met's pipeline. And that argument is not correct in my view. Next slide. Can you advance it, Duke? Yeah. So the two things. The Met's pipe, heads south past and through Fallbrook and Rainbow, but the pipe is there because it made an agreement in whatever it is, 1940 something, it made an agreement with the authority. And so the water is moving because it's been contracted for by the authority. Obviously the authority needs to serve its member agencies, but it's the authority that owns the water and distributes it to Fallbrook and Rainbow and everybody else in the system. Next slide. And then the second point, as I mentioned, is some of the water moving through Met's pipeline is actually QSA water that belongs not to Met, but to the authority, and that is being pumped by Met as a conveyor, not a supplier. So it seems to me you can't look at the amount of water coming out of Met's turnouts as Met water that is not a benefit, not associated with authority membership. Next slide. So the point is, for this reason, London Motor's assessment of the benefits is too low, because the benefits are more than the water that didn't come from Met's pipe. Next slide. Then you have the cost, and London Motor focuses on the various fixed charge that the authority has been charging, the customer service charge, the etc., supply reliability infrastructure. So the amount paid by Fallbrook and Rainbow over the last 10 years as a share of the total fixed charges paid by all member agencies is about 4.5%. And the London Motor report points out that the share of meters in Fallbrook and Rainbow, meter equivalents, is about 2.8%. It's moved between 2.7 and 2.9%. So the LMA report says Fallbrook and Rainbow paid 4.5% of the fixed charges, and that's unfair because they were 2.8% of the meter equivalents, and so that's disproportionate. Next slide, please. So the point is, the average is that Fallbrook and Rainbow used twice as much water, or Fallbrook and Rainbow's customers used twice as much water per meter equivalent as the average of all the other member agencies of the authority. And so it does make a difference if you allocate fixed charges based on meters or water use, because the water use is higher in Fallbrook and Rainbow compared to other member agencies. And my own view and experience in the course of my career is for a wholesale agency, the number of meters in a member agency is not particularly relevant for cost allocation. It's relevant for a retail agency because the number of meters you have is related to the density of the pipe network, and that touches on pressure zone issues and other things. But for a wholesale agency, in effect, the density of the member agency pipe network is irrelevant. And that's sort of what's measured by meters, meter equivalents. For a wholesale level, what matters is the amount of water you're delivering. That determines your operating costs, and it determines your fixed costs because it determines your infrastructure. And there are different aspects. The average amount of water delivered per week or per day or per month, or the peak amount delivered, because the infrastructure is sized to peak capacity. So what's reasonable, in my view, is to base fixed charges on the volume of water, the average volume, the peak volume, something like that. But I don't think the meter equivalence is really relevant for cost allocation. Next slide. So I don't, so the LMA report says the benefits are low and the costs are too high, because they were based essentially on volume of water, not on meters. But I really don't think that that holds up. And so I don't really accept the conclusion that there's a huge imbalance between the costs and benefits that the authority has paid up to now. Next slide. So now I want to talk about supply reliability. And
Dr. Hanneman, can I pause you real quick as
yes,
you
of
shift
course.
gears here?
Yes.
Just maybe make sure that there's no
yes,
questions or comments from anybody at this point in time. It seems like you're shifting gears and topics, and I just want to give somebody the opportunity to maybe ask a question or a comment to that portion of the presentation.
Thank you, Adam. And we can go back, as appropriate.
Hey, Adam, I had a comment. I, for some reason, can't raise my hand.
Yeah, if there's anybody that wants to just speak up, please do, because I'm having difficulty seeing every member of the committee while Deuce shares his screen. So Jack, sounds like you got a question or a comment, and looks like Brian Albright may have one next. So
I figured it out. If you want me to raise my hand and wait, you'd think I know by now. Hey, so I just wanted to make a couple points. I appreciate that perspective on the water supply side of it. One is on the use of MWD facilities too. So sometimes using the past history to project what's happening now or going forward can give you some misleading information. So Fallbrook Public Utility District, for example, I think for the last year, we haven't used any MET infrastructure or our water authority infrastructure. The reason we used that 30% was to keep water fresh in that line. Mm-hmm. We finally realized that's not a real good reason to use something when we don't need to. So that facility is not in use anymore. There's no projection to ever need it. We have plenty of capacity within the turnouts on MET. So that's just one of those things that probably should have been dealt with some time ago, but it took us a while to realize it. So currently we use no water authority infrastructure. We don't plan to use the water authority infrastructure. And just to give you, sort of another perspective on the water supply side. So I agree with what you're saying if we weren't in the situation where our base supply was Metropolitan. So as a wholesale agency of Metropolitan, the decision you have to make is, can I get water cheaper or more reliable than Metropolitan? And reliable, if you're a Metropolitan member agency, means when Met goes into allocations, do I get more water than I otherwise would under those allocations? And can I use it? Right. So if Met goes into a 15% allocation, if they're 50% of my supply, then I'd get a 7.5% cutback. Right. If I only needed that, correct. So when you're looking at benefit for the water authority, it's not the benefit when water's available. Right. It's the benefit when Met's in an allocation. Because when water's available, then you could have the same water from Metropolitan. That's not the benefit. It's a benefit is, do I get a benefit during the allocation? And so I think what our argument is we're paying when the water's available. And as you noted, we pay more per person because we use more water per person. But when you're in an allocation, we end up taking a bigger cut because most of our water use is outdoors. So if the original premise of the water authority and the cost structure is that, if Met does a 15% and the water authority does a 7.5% cutback, all member agencies, they have that same 7.5% cutback. But what you found, and you see it from the last drought, with that allocation goes outdoor watering restrictions. As soon as there's outdoor watering restrictions, because of the nature of Fallbrook and Rainbow, one from the M&I side, two from the agricultural side, sees a more significant drop in their water sales. So we don't get the same benefit in allocations. And I think that's the perspective that goes behind the London Motor Report. So when you're talking fixed costs, I think you're often talking about a fixed numerator and a denominator that's on water sales. And that's why with the Water Authority, they do have a meter equivalent charge, the IAC, and they're also now looking at more fixed costs. And when we say fixed, at least to me, being a member of the Water Authority, we're talking fixed numerator and denominator, because we're starting to recognize some of those premiums that you're seeing in that fixed cost. And when you think about it, to me, that fixed cost is essentially a premium over Metropolitan's water costs. So you've decided to pay some premium over the Met rate because of some benefit you receive. That premium is maybe more tied to how many people you serve than how much water you use. Because in those allocations, a lot of times the cutbacks you get, the amount of water you're able to use is really often more tightly based on how much water is being used indoors. That's really the benefit. So if you look at the last drought, some agencies that are more urban, right, when Met went into a 15% allocation, some agencies that are more urban didn't have to do a full 15% cutback, where Rainbow and Fallbrook ended up being 30+%, right? So our cutback was twice of Met's cutback. So in that situation, there's no benefit of those supplies in allocation because your cutback is already twice what you would receive. So that's just, I think I understand your perspective, which if the Water Authority was not a member of Met and didn't have Met supplies as a baseline, I would agree. Or if you were just a standalone water supplier that had to secure all your own supplies, I would agree. But that sort of Met backstop baseline, to me, changes that calculation in terms of what the benefit you receive. And one way I'd look at it is, what would be the difference if we were members of Eastern over the last 10 years? What would we have paid? What would be the difference in the benefit we receive? So that's one way I look at it, just a different perspective. I totally respect the way you look at it and your perspective. That's just sort of the other perspective I think we look at it that sort of ties to how London Motor looks at it, is that supply benefit really on a water use benefit, or should it be something else like meters? So appreciate you letting me raise that comment.
Jack, if I can just, no, what you said is very interesting, and it certainly raises some issues I hadn't thought of or looked into. And I mean, what I'd like to do, I've taken some notes. What I'd like to do is to follow up with some questions to you and others based on this. But let me, in what you were saying, there were two things going on. One is agricultural water and the cutbacks for folks who are on the ag water rate. And then the other is restrictions on lawn watering or restrictions on residential use, like happened in the drought. And of course, I'm aware of them, but I hadn't paid attention to those, or the relative severity of those cutbacks for you, for Rainbow, for other authority members. And so I should look at that, to some degree. So I wanted to, I just want to acknowledge that. And obviously other people, can make comments on this. But what I want to say is, would also be useful to exchange emails or just some text and points about this, because I'll then be digging into that over the next several weeks.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. And I just want to give you that sort of the perspective that sits behind the London Motor Report, which is just a different way of looking at it. And I think that the actual water use changes you saw relative to different agencies. So if we were all similar makeup, I would also agree with you. But Fallbrook and Rainbow have a very different drought response. So as soon as you say outdoor water restrictions, you can't dial it in. You can't, oh, I'll do 5%. It's significant because most of our water use is outdoors. And that's why you see that variation in per capita use isn't due just to agriculture. It's due to outdoor water use. And so that's, to us, the only time we'd really benefit in that situation, either from water supply reliability or storage, quite honestly, like in an ESP event, which is the most of the fixed costs, is if you assume during these emergencies, like next year, if we continue, there will be no restrictions on outdoor water use. And that's just not the perspective I have on it, that, say there was an ESP event and the aqueduct severed, that we're going to say, hey, you know what, water 7 days a week. And so that's really the driver. And we still have a lot of outdoor water use. It's not, it's not hardened to the fact that our water use is primarily indoors. It's still mostly outdoors because our density is very low. We're rural.
Let me agree with what you're saying. One thing is the restrictions, Governor Brown's restrictions on residential water use came out of the blue, I'm sure for all of you, and kind of upset the apple cart for infrastructure and infrastructure financing, because the whole focus of urban water management plans and looking ahead and thinking of drought. Obviously, there was going to be some conservation, but as we know, in 2015, a significant number of water agencies around California actually couldn't use all the water they had because they needed to comply. And so what I'm saying is that's kind of upset the apple cart for everybody. And
and I'm not saying to assume that you will have the same Governor Brown prescriptive, where Fallbrook had to cut back 30%. The reality is we don't have the ability to kind of tune in a certain level, right? It just shows you, if you have outdoor water use restrictions, what the reaction is and what you're going to see within certain agencies. And so even, 3 days a week watering restrictions have a much more significant impact on, Fallbrook-Rainbow agencies than it does many others. That's all that we're saying, or I'm saying.
I appreciate it.
I don't speak for Tom. That's dangerous. So.
Thanks, Jack. More than happy to help facilitate any continued communication on that matter with Dr. Hanneman. So I think I saw Brian Albright's hand up next. So Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Dr. Hanneman, I'll just say I really appreciated the Q&A format of that presentation. It was easy for me to absorb the content. So thank you for that. I'm an economist by training and not a water expert. And so I know that there's a broad variance in sort of the price and cost ratio on products that are delivered to the home, right, between supply and conveyance. So I'm just curious, in the world of water, sort of what is the price to cost ratio when you're talking about actual water supply versus only conveyance?
It varies greatly. So in the case of Apple Valley, which is litigation that was just the water cost was 5%. I'm sorry, the variable cost, the actual cost of generating water, pumping water and treating, was 5% of the operating costs of the system. And that's because it was groundwater, it was good quality, it was pretty shallow groundwater, it's nothing. My general experience is sort of variable cost is from as low as 5% to maybe 30 or 40%. And it also depends, Brian, on where you are on the chain. So what I mean is you have a wholesaler, and then it supplies maybe another wholesaler, and then that other wholesaler goes to the retailer. So at the top of the chain, or maybe you think of it as the bottom of the tree, you have MET or you have authority with a water right, and they're paying nothing for the water right. Everything, I mean, so there's some pumping cost and there's some treatment cost, but everything, 95% or whatever, is the pipes, the fixed cost. They sell to a second wholesale agency. They charge a per acre charge. So for the second agency, it's paying a variable cost because it's paying a per acre charge to the first supplier. So it's variable. It still has the cost of plumbing, but it also has a bigger variable cost because the first agency had, essentially had no charge for the water. It just had the pumping charge. The next guy in the supply chain has some charge for the water, but he has a pipe. But he has like a regional pipe system. Then you get to the retail agency, it has a local pipe system. But the variable cost is a bigger portion. So it kind of can range between 5 and 40%. But for a wholesale agency, 5% was very low. It was an unusual, but I would say 15 to 25% is what you find. And so it's these fixed costs which, make running a water supply business so economically difficult.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Tom, I think your hand is up next if you want to go.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And I appreciate the time. I guess a couple quick comments on those first two topics with regard to the supply mix. All those things that you indicated have good roots and facts. I think that there is some nuance to the exchange agreement as to when does that water go into Met's pool and become Met's choice as to what to do with it. And whether that happens out at Lake Havasu or somewhere else in the mix, it's part of the supply portfolio that serves the entire Skinner service area. So exactly which molecules and whatnot is important, but not super important. But I think that one of the things that you had in your slide, and I apologize, the slides aren't numbered, so I can't reference it directly, but it indicated that for the Water Authority, 38% of the water that they get is a supply from Met, not a conveyance from Met, right? And that they're relying on Met for both the molecules and delivery. Well, since Fallbrook-Rainbow are roughly 6% of the Water Authority, that means that in a detachment, they're still net, maybe they're going to be 30% at that point because it's a smaller volume as Met as a supply. And so there's, from a LAFCO perspective, for us, that water, it could be considered, since you can't separate the molecules, that we're getting part of that 38% right now, especially because we're north of decel, and that won't change for us. I think that's kind of the basis that we were looking at on that concept. So, and on the other point regarding the LMA, the LMA report isn't a foundational piece of our application to LAFCO. It's not one of the items that I believe the commission will be looking at or referencing. It was really just more of an example of way one economist team looks at it. I know I read the UT every day, and I think once a week in the business section, they ask a panel of economists a question, and there's yes or no, and they're almost always evenly split. And so it's fair to analyze the same thing in two different ways and not come up with the same conclusion. But it is, the London Motor guys, I don't think I'm going to hire them to write a rebuttal because I don't think it's useful for LAFCO and what LAFCO needed to decide. That was just a point that our board asked them to look at to see what they thought. I think that Jack's point earlier is if you looked at a comparison of what if we were with Eastern 10 years ago, what would that difference have been made? I think that'll show a clearer point. And to echo Jack's thought about how much water we take off Met, I think right now at Rainbow, we're pushing 70% off our Met. I emailed my operations manager, but for this calendar year, we're at 70% off the Met connections and only 30 off the southerly connections. And we're on our way to moving entirely to the Met connections, primarily because the cost of the transportation rate at the Water Authority has been going up. My goal is to be, irrespective of detachment, completely off Water Authority connections within the next 18 months. Detachment will make that ROI a lot sweeter, but we're moving to $175 an acre foot for transportation costs, and that pencils any kind of improvements we need to make that transition. So we're on our way there, and we will be there. So past in this case is not prologue.
Well, thank you. So a couple of things. I didn't mean to or sort of pick on the London Motor report. It was more that I suddenly realized, 3 or 4 weeks ago, I of course I'd read it, but I had done nothing with it, and it occurred to me I should read it and comment on it. That's all. So it's an accident of timing, but with regard to the point you just made, Tom, about reducing the amount of water from the authorities' turnout, and I think you said you're up at 70%. If you, and this applies to all of you, if you sort of have a chance, if you could comment on the numbers, and as you were saying that's outdated, because I've been using numbers that were readily available that in several cases are a year or 2 years old. And for next month, I want to get the most up-to-date numbers. But there'll be, a whole number of places. And I looked at the urban water management planning, but things will be changing. And so please, if you have a moment, just send an email or whatever. I'm going to listen to the transcript of this meeting. I'm taking notes, but I'll take more notes. But also, if you just shoot a message, because I'd like to update the numbers as make them as relevant as possible. So thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Sandy, see you raising your hand.
Thank you. I lost the ability to raise the hand virtually. So just a couple of comments I wanted to make. Really appreciate the discussion. I think the couple points that are lost here are the fact that by fact of the virtue that the Water Authority has reliable supplies, in 2016, when we had cutbacks from Met, there weren't cutbacks to the member agencies. And that is a specific point. And additionally, the mandatory cutback numbers were reduced from the state because we had reliable supplies and we could meet the stress test that the state had set up. Just a point of clarification, the Water Authority owns the turnouts. It's interesting to talk about, we take all of our water, or we're taking more of our water from the Met pipeline. That's still very interesting, but the water that's primarily coming down is water that's owned by the Water Authority, and that increases over time. And the suggestion to look forward to Met and putting the Met and the Water Authority sort of on the same plane, that they're at the same reliability level, is not the case. They have investments to come that will increase that reliability, but those investments haven't been made, nor have the costs associated with those investments been made. So, I know there's a lot of talk all the time back and forth about molecules of water and all of that. At the end of the day, the bottom line is what you said is the Water Authority has ownership to water that's being served to Rainbow and Fallbrook. Actually, Rainbow does directly get some water from the desal plant, and it's been shown in terms of the actual locations where it's delivered. So I just want to make sure we're all dealing with the full range of the facts here. And I can certainly understand Tom's interest in getting off of the Water Authority pipeline for transportation reasons, but he still has the reliability of the Water Authority.
Thank you, Sandy. I don't see any other virtual hands up. Just want to check to make sure if there's any manual hands for any comments or questions. And having seen none, Dr. Hanneman, I think that concludes that little Q&A portion of your presentation. Yes. So if you want to proceed, please do.
Yes, let's go to where we were due. So let me say, this is going to be a partial discussion of supply reliability. There's significant, and thanks, this is where I wanted to stop. So underlying this is the reliability of water from the Colorado River, the reliability of, I'm forgetting what it's called, type 3 water versus 3A or 3B versus 4 water, and also the reliability of State Water Project water. I've been following current events. I've got a lot of material. I'm not going to present that today, but I will have it all written up for the next meeting, and probably I'll have a sort of a freestanding memo on that to circulate ahead of the meeting. But I've been gathering material, and also, as you all know, the situation is kind of changing month by month. So I'm going to talk about a corner of supply reliability, but in a way, the big question is Colorado River water and State Water Project water. And that's very much a case where the past isn't going to be a good predictor of the future, because these, we have the Delta fix issues still hanging over us, and the Colorado River is unfolding in a novel way. And as someone who gets part of his water in Phoenix from the Colorado River, I get emails 2 or 3 times a week from Arizona DWR on the unfolding situation. But I'm focusing anyhow on a corner. So I'm going to make a few remarks about Fallbrook and Rainbow, and then Eastern. And what I'm doing is presenting information from the urban water management plans of these agencies. And I'm looking out through 2035. So looking out, whatever it is, 14 years. First of all, this is the 2 tables. Fallbrook anticipates some growth in demand from 8,900, 8,920 acre feet a year to 10,381. Rainbow has a smaller growth from, as you see, 14,300 to 14,600. The story here, the interesting story, is local supply. And of course, Jack, you've talked about this. There's a large increase in local supply, and the result is that Fallbrook's reliance on an external supply, by which I mean the authority or Eastern, the reliance drops from 93% to whatever it is, 45%. It drops next year, and so that's a big change, a big increase in local supply. Rainbow will have a smaller increase in local supply, kicking in about 2030. Let's go on to the next slide. So just to, this is just summarizing the changes. Fallbrook is 93% reliant this year, this calendar year, on external supply, and it'll be going down into the 40% imminently. Rainbow is 100%, and it'll go down to 86%. That's the key point. Next slide looks at Eastern and Eastern. So Eastern, and Nick, thank you for the very helpful conversation we had on Friday. Eastern is a wholesaler and is a retailer and a wholesaler of water, and it treats wastewater. So some of the water it sells is recycled water. So it supplies raw and treated water and recycled water. And this is just the current breakdown from your urban water management plan. you're a wholesaler, you have a significant wholesale service area. And so right now, total supply is 154,000 acre feet, 120 roughly. No, let's go to the next slide. So this is the same data. You have local groundwater, you have recycled water, there's fresh water that's groundwater, and you also have some desalinated groundwater. But and then you get water from Metropolitan. What I take away from the data in the urban water management plan is the local supply is used more for the retail service area and less for the wholesale area. So it's 46% of the retail supply and 21% of the wholesale supply, and the rest is metropolitan water. So metropolitan is a bigger portion, 79% of the wholesale supply. Next slide. So the wholesale customers fall into two groups. Most of them pay a supply charge, which this year is, if I got it right, $1,350 an acre foot. And that includes MET's charge to you, and it includes also other charges you have, conveyance and whatever, that are rolled in to the volumetric rate. But then you have, I think it's just two customers right now, Rancho California Water and Elsinore Valley MWD, where they have MWD pipes passing through their service territory, and they take water from turnouts on those pipes. They are, Metropolitan bills you for the water, and you pass the charge on to them, and you charge an administrative fee, which is X per, I'm forgetting, per cubic foot or something, and comes to $11 an acre foot. And that's, so you're not, so these two have direct access to a metropolitan pipeline. They're not using your infrastructure, the rest of your water distribution system. And so they're not set up for you to supply groundwater to them or recycled water, because that would require pipes, and there's none of your, that would require your pipes to connect up with them, and your pipes don't connect up with them. It's just the metropolitan aqueduct or pipeline going by. And if Fallbrook-Rainbow join Eastern Service Area, you'd plan to treat them the same way as those two entities, Rancho California and Elsinore, which are located right along metropolitan pipes. And the current plan is Fallbrook-Rainbow wouldn't be connected to your distribution system. So you would be just imposing the administrative charge on top of Metropolitan's tier 1 rate. So, so you have, I'm forgetting, 10, 12 wholesale customers, maybe I'm forgetting that I have the list in front of me, but two of them are in this separate category where you're just imposing an administrative charge because they're not using your network. Next slide. Now, Riverside County is growing a lot, and so it looks as so the urban water management plan forecasts about a 22% growth in the population, and it's basically the same percentage for the retail service area and the wholesale service area. between 2020 and 2035. And so that'll lead to an increase in demand. And so I just put here, I'm going to come back to these numbers on the next slide, the growth in demand, total demand, retail and wholesale for sort of raw and treated water and for recycled water will increase by 75,000 acre foot, which is about 50%. The combined aggregate demand in 2020 is 153,000. And so there's a 7 acre feet and there's a 50% increase in that over the next 15 years. That's the next slide. And so this is just summarizing that. There's a 22% growth in population, but overall a 50% growth in water demand. And to meet that demand, Eastern is going to significantly increase its supply from local groundwater and its supply from recycled water, but it will also need to pull in more water from metropolitan. So it'll increase groundwater by 38%, recycled water by 31%, and external supply by 27%. So this is a big increase in local supply, but there'll still be essentially a need for 25,000 acre foot, 24,900 or whatever from metropolitan by 2035. And of course,
Dr. Hammond, real quick, I think I see a question real quick.
Sure.
By Keen.
Sure.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Adam. So I just had a quick question for you, Professor. So looking at this 46% projected increase in retail for Eastern, which is double the percent difference in population growth, how does that happen? Because, you know, just from a layman perspective, I'm under the impression that the per capita water use for the most part is all going down, yet here in Eastern Municipal, it's going up. Why the distinction?
You're right. And I'm sure it's discussed in the Urban Water Management Plan. I was thinking of it this weekend, but I don't have the answer. Nick, do you have, because it is striking when you put it that way.
I don't have the answer. There's a lot of data here. And one of the things that I'd like to do as a follow-up is to circle back with our water resource planners and confirm that we're all on the same page with the information that we have here. But I was wondering the same thing myself that kind of jumped out as me as something that I want to get some clarification on.
No, and I appreciate. So I am unfortunately capable of making typos and misreading numbers. I was checking a whole bunch, but this has been the last couple of days have been crazy. So there could be a mistake. I think it's correct, but again, this is all the more why I wanted everybody to have a chance to look at this. Correct numbers, or there may be newer numbers. So that's why I wanted to emphasize at the very beginning that this was a draft, because all these things need to be made bulletproof.
Thank you. Commissioner Drake, I think I see your hand up as well. Do you have a question or comment? I think you're muted if you want to start over here for a sec.
Thank you. Dr. Hanneman, is that recycled water Title 22 water?
I don't know, Nick.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Gary, do you have a question and comment as well?
Yeah, just out of curiosity too, within that, since we're looking at Eastern system itself, how much of the system of Eastern system that the Eastern ratepayers have paid for that Rainbow and Fallbrook are buying into, or are they only accessing the MWD water at that point?
I think the answer is only the MWD.
Okay, and that's so some of the stuff within Eastern really doesn't matter because they're not buying into any of the system that their ratepayers pay for.
Should we go on?
Jack, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So just to sort of follow along, so we started this meeting with the discussion about the fixed cost allocation from the water authority. And we said, hey, the way they're doing that, or at least the conclusion was, seems reasonable. A large percentage of that cost allocation is desal, right? So water supply reliability, desal. Well, I don't have access to that, right? The argument is that when there's an allocation, the water authority's overall demand on MET is less because of desal. That's the benefit. That's why I pay for it as Fallbrook customers, right? So I don't have access to that infrastructure. It can't get delivered to me. Yeah, we say there's a supply benefit. Then for some reason, it seems like we're going to Eastern and saying, well, Eastern now, where they have local supplies, that reduces their demands on MET, which means their cutback is not 100% MET cutback. It's less when they go into allocation. Somehow isn't a benefit unless we actually use it. And so I think the big differential with Eastern rate structure and the water authority rate structure is Eastern has recognized that there's a difference for customers that need their infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, the transportation Dr. Hanneman talked about, and what that cost is, versus the water authority where we're just the same members as everyone else, with a slight, charge that you don't pay for. So I think I'm having trouble reconciling why we're focused on sort of drops of water for Eastern, but not drops of water for the water authority, specifically when we talked about how costs are allocated for drops of water we don't get, and then suddenly it's important for Eastern. So I struggle a little bit to reconcile those 2 points.
I'm making a point about supply reliability that will come in another 1 or 2 slides. That's why I was bringing it. That's why I was presenting these numbers.
I don't see any other questions or comments at this point, Dr. Hanneman, so you can continue.
Let's just go on to the next. So this is just the table underpinning what I said on the previous slide. So we'll move on to the next slide, Dew. So the point I'm making is there's a significant growth in Eastern service population, in Eastern service area, both its retail, growth not only in population, but in demand, both its retail demand and its wholesale demand. And so if Fallbrook-Rainbow join Eastern, that will come on top of this growing demand. So Eastern's demand, and so Fallbrook-Rainbow together by 2035 are an extra 17,000 acre-foot, something like that. So that will kick up the extra water that Eastern needs from metropolitan from about 25,000 acre-foot to 42,000.
Tom, do you have a quick question or comment?
Yeah, just on that point, and I don't dispute the facts there, but the reality is also that the water authority's demands on MET, which are 38% of their total demand, will drop by the exact same amount. So it's a net zero difference.
Hi. So let's go on to the next slide. And let me just see. Actually, okay, and then the next slide. This is just the sort of conclusion of this. So the point is 2 things. I'm saying 2 things looking forward. Eastern is going to need more water from MET because it's growing, even though it's greatly increasing local supplies. And Fallbrook-Rainbow will add to that, but Fallbrook and Rainbow are not plugged in to the rest of Eastern's distribution system. So they will be dependent on what Metropolitan does and how Eastern handles that with the, whatever it is, the 8 or 9 other customers. They're set up so they could receive local groundwater or recycled water if they're located in appropriately within the network. So the point I'm making, and the thing that had struck me is, with the significant population growth and growth in the demand for water in Riverside County, the reliability, the issue, the question of possible limits to metropolitan water loom a bit larger than if Fallbrook and Rainbow were still served by the authority. So this is more of a gamble, getting in this situation where Riverside is growing, county is growing, and demand for water is growing. Moving from San Diego County to Riverside County is somewhat more risky. How much more risky and whatever, I'm not going to quantify, but that's something I hadn't appreciated before I took this second look at Eastern's projections. That's the point I wanted to make. And Adam, this is a good point to stop. If there's anything, I have only a little bit more to go on to.
Okay, we can push pause real quick to see if there's any additional questions or comments, which it appears to be. So, Keen, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Professor. So in terms of reliability, and being one of the laymen on this panel or call, if we're saying that Fallbrook and Rainbow right now are largely dependent on the water authority via Skinner, which is metropolitan water, as I understand it, and then Eastern, if they join Eastern, will be equally largely dependent on Met because they're not going to be tied into the local groundwater or other supplies. Would it be fair to say that under normal conditions, it's just a push? There's not a big difference in water supply or reliability. And I'm still trying to get my hand over this molecule issue. So that was a bit above my pay grade. And then it just becomes an issue, or as you just said, a gamble under drought conditions, but it's not quantifiable.
So just one thing, although the water is coming from Skinner, some of it is the authority's QSA water, and some of it is Met's Colorado River water. And the authority's Colorado River water is somewhat more reliable than Met's. Now, let me, and I will write all this up. So the context, you know, the State Water Project and Colorado River is sort of separate. And so, I mean, they have different issues. With the Colorado River, California has a privileged position. So there's California, there's Nevada, there's Arizona. There is, I mean, the expectation is that I think it's next month, the Bureau of Reclamation will sort of notch up the degree of drought or the degree of shortage on the Colorado River. And that will bite into Arizona. But it won't bite into California yet, because California gets hit. Its Colorado River supply gets hit only if the water in Lake Mead goes lower. But the water, it looks as though the water will be low enough by the end of this year that the Bureau will take a bite out of Arizona's supply. But looking 2, 3, 4, 10 years into the future, it is possible that there'll be a bite out of California's water from the Colorado River, and that bite will particularly hit Metropolitan rather than the authority. And that's because Imperial has a higher priority. Metropolitan gets 110,000 acre foot from Imperial. The authority gets 278,000 acre foot. But the authority serves a smaller region than this. So, that's the crucial event. If the drought continues and worsens in the Colorado River, not next year, but entirely possible within the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, Metropolitan will get a bigger bite of its Colorado River supply than the authority. But the water would still, go through Skinner. But if it's the authority's water, it won't be scrunched as much as if Met's. So that's where that kicks in. Let me say briefly, with the Delta, the Delta is, I won't say a basket case, but the Delta really is threatened by earthquake faults, which have always been there, by subsidence of the Delta Islands, which make them vulnerable to a high tide or a winter storm with no earthquake. And then with climate change and rising sea level, I think it's sort of totally certain that the Delta system, if nothing is done, the Delta system will be destroyed by the end of this century, and quite possibly by 2050. Just because the islands are so far below sea level and the sea level is rising. Over the last year, it rose, over the last decade, over the last century, it rose, I think 10 foot, 12 foot. It's expected to rise, 3 foot over 100 years. And that's why the Delta fix is sort of crucial, because it's just going to go away. The issue there, once the Delta fix is done, I think there'll be a high level of reliability. The problem is between now and when the Delta fix gets implemented, there can be a failure in the supply. That's one thing. That's failure in the supply, what I've been talking about. The other thing is drought. And we've experienced in 2014 and significant cutbacks in State Water Project water without the failure, without catastrophic failure. So the State Water Project has been ratcheted back, is being ratcheted down this year. And that puts pressure on Met. It doesn't put the same pressure on the authority because the authority doesn't own water. I'll show you a number on the next slide, which just drives that home.
Got a few more questions before we move to the next slide. Tom, do you still have your hand up for a question or comment?
I do, thank you. I think that, I guess, and it's also important for this ad hoc committee, what we're doing here is trying to look through this topic and provide guidance to the staff at LAFCO so they can, and I assume the Special District Advisory Committee as well, so when they go to consider this, they can have some relevant information other than our applications. And when we look at this concept of relative reliability, that's not solidly ground in LAFCO policies and procedures, L107 and L109. really looks at adequacy of supply. But the reality of the situation is that if for Rainbow anyway, darn near half of the water our customers use are under the ag program, with which they get a discount because they don't want that level of reliability. They're willing to give that up. They don't pay into ESP or the supply reliability charge and storage because they can't afford it. And it comes down to, for each member agency to make their own decisions on what investments to make into water supply reliability and how that fits your customers. We do not have biotech or tourism or things like that. We're agricultural in Rainbow. But just so you know, in our agreements with Eastern, we do have the ability and the right to buy in should our board decide that it's worth paying extra for some additional cohort of reliability, that they can do that and invest in other supplies or develop them with Eastern as part of that process and gain access to those. For our agency, the monetary aspect of our water users, our agricultural users, means that if we make those investments, they go out of business. And so we've already seen that with losses of tens of thousands of acres of avocado and whatnot. So it's not really an option for us. And those investments have little benefit for us. Sure, the desal plant does burp a little water north in the very, very, very far southern part of our service area during certain hydraulic conditions. But it's not a supply benefit to us other than to offset Met supplies. But remember, Met's still the supplier, both molecules and conveyor, of 38% of the water authority's water. And the change from us to buying that our 7% or 6% of the water authority's water will just reduce that amount at the water authority and increase the same amount at Eastern. So it's a zero-sum game. But I think that's important for this committee, as well as to report to the commission, that supply reliability on its own, saying this one's incrementally higher or something might happen 50 years from now, makes it a bad bet. It's really the board, our elected board's decision of what level of reliability that they were elected to serve the people of our community. So I'll pass it on to the next person.
Thank you, Tom. Jack, I think your hand was next in order. If you want to go.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I'm still, because we sort of circled back on it, but I'm still struggling a little bit with, at the beginning, we talked about the QSA supply is oftentimes an in lieu supply. So it can be substituted with other water, right? It's more of a paper exercise than anything. It goes into the Met's pool of supplies. And then what actually gets delivered is up to Met. It's an in lieu transfer. It's not molecules of water that get delivered. Same way with desal within the water authority service area. It's not for most of us, we don't actually get it. It's this idea of it's available as sort of an in lieu supply, but then we're very focused on Easterns being physically delivered. And so I'm still struggling with why that distinction is important. And one of the things is, I think, there was speculation about Eastern, how they would handle it, but they laid that out. So, one of the initial documents they did was the water supply reliability analysis that talked about, in these different Met allocations, here's what we would do. And so I think what would be helpful is to actually review and identify what's incorrect in that document. That's sort of the document we've looked at and said, hey, we've looked at this and we feel comfortable with Eastern being able to meet our needs based on this document that identified how Eastern plans to handle these things. It would be helpful to specifically identify what is incorrect in that assessment, what's incorrect in that assessment by Eastern. The last point is, it seems like it's important. We're making some pretty big conclusions on sort of Southern California water itself in this exercise, because what's coming out of this in a lot of ways is this risk of two rural water agencies relying on Eastern or Metropolitan. That's a pretty significant thing to have going forward. Two agencies that have mostly rural and agricultural water use, said, hey, the future is bleak, not just for Metropolitan but for Eastern. It might be good to chase some of these. I don't know if you've talked to the water supply side people at Metropolitan, but some of them may have different perspectives on Colorado River cuts. How does that follow through? Is there that future where essentially everyone says, hey, water authority, you're good. Everyone else is going to take, cuts and nothing's going to happen to those supplies. So it seems like the road we're going down on, sort of significant conclusions on Southern California water supply, it might be worth at least reaching out to, those involved at Metropolitan. And I believe you talked to some of the people at Eastern, but that's just, that in lieu water is one of the main things I'm still struggling with a little bit of the differential.
Thanks, Jack. Nick, I think your hand was up next.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, Jack had brought up the point that I wanted to discuss. And right from the start of this process, we understood very clearly that water reliability was going to be a key consideration. And so Eastern, we put a lot of effort into really carefully analyzing that, preparing a technical memorandum addressing water reliability as an Eastern supplier to Fallbrook and Rainbow. And we looked at a whole variety of allocation scenarios, different drought conditions, future demands and different time frames with population growth with and without Fallbrook and Rainbow as a part of the demand supply scenario. And in every case, the data we looked at, the analysis that we did, we showed that water can be 100% reliably provided to Fallbrook and Rainbow if they were annexed into Eastern. So appreciate, as I said, Dr. Hanneman, you presented a lot of data there. I assume that we're all working with the same data. I think predominantly the information that you're utilizing is the information in our urban water management plan. So hopefully it's the same information. Just at a glance, I don't know if there's any inconsistencies there. I do want to circle back and look at that. But if our initial analysis and technical memorandum hasn't been, carefully considered, I would suggest that it should. I will be circling back around with, again, our water resource planners that prepare that information and looking at this data to see if there are any errors in any of that. So I just wanted to say that, we did a careful assessment. That information's there, and we should be looking at that. And then I just wanted to clarify, Dr. Hanneman, my understanding that when you say that there's greater risk for Fallbrook or Rainbow annexed into Eastern, is that simply a recognition of population growth, Riverside County versus San Diego County? Is that what I was hearing?
Thank you, Professor. So it's a bit more than this. It's your need for metropolitan water for, the way I think of it is you have your retail customers, you have the wholesale customers who pay the 200, pay $13.50 an acre foot or whatever right now. And then you have the ones paying $11 an acre foot administrative charge. And so Fallbrook and Rainbow aren't going to grow very much, but the others are. Rancho California, at least, the other wholesale customers and your retail customers. So your demand is growing. You're going to be doing a lot of local supply, but still you'll need a significant, whatever it is, 25,000 acre foot more metropolitan water. And the question is, if there is a supply crunch and Metropolitan has to limit or has to do, has a strong allocation with this growth in demand, the guys paying $11 an acre foot, will they get squeezed relative to the guys paying $245 an acre foot surcharge over in terms of getting access to water or getting squeezed? If there weren't this striking population growth in Riverside County, it's sort of less of an issue. So it's not but it's this combination of not having the more senior QSA water, not depending in the same way on the state water project, and therefore being vulnerable to drought there, and having these two groups of wholesale customers, one of whom is less connected and pays less. And the question is, how will that work? And let me comment, I've read your technical memorandum, and I will, and I haven't addressed it so far. I'll do that for next month, but maybe I'm wrong. I read the technical memorandum as saying something like this. If Met can, it'll supply it'll mandate, it'll have an allocation, it'll mandate an X% cutback. But if it can, it will supply additional water, and it'll just charge a higher rate, a tier 2 rate or whatever. And any of our member agencies that want to buy the more expensive water, they can do that. We're not going to stop them at all. We'll just stand by and watch them do. But that sort of hint, so the technical memorandum analysis says sort of as long as Met has enough water and isn't in a real squeeze, it'll charge more money. But any of our agencies, including Fallbrook-Rainbow, if they want to buy more water from Met, they can do it 100% of what they need. And that's sort of confident. And I'm concerned with the demands on Met already growing by 25,000 acre foot, 10, 12, 13 years from now. That's the sense in which I'm saying it's a gamble, or more of a gamble. So that's what I'm thinking, and I may be mischaracterizing your analysis.
Gary, I think your hand was up next for any question or comment.
Yeah, and I think the question was asked appropriately, but not necessarily answered.
Yes.
And that would be, will the Eastern ratepayers and if Fallbrook and Rainbow are in there, will the ones paying $11 be squeezed just as much as the one paying $200 and something? Will they both have the same reliability, regardless of what they're paying?
Sandy, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of things I wanted to add. I wanted to be really clear and circle back, because I think there's been a whole lot of things said and alluded to, but the Water Authority has 280,000 acre feet of water a year on high priority Colorado River water rights through IID. In the event of a cutback, and as Dr. Hanneman said, next month, Arizona and Nevada are going to be cut back. And I suspect they'll be within a year, there'll be a hit on California, at which MWD will take that hit, not San Diego. This whole confusion or obfuscation about the molecules of water, it does not matter. We have rights to 280,000 acre feet of water, period. So to suggest that that's somehow at risk or doesn't matter or isn't Water Authority water is inaccurate. I just want to be clear about that. I'd also say, back to the Eastern piece, I think we're saying the same thing, but for clarification, and I think Jack or Tom said it, if they want raw reliability, they can pay more to Eastern and get Eastern's local supplies. But as of right now, what they're contracted to do is get water essentially through Metropolitan. If they were to have the same reliability or similar reliability, it appears they would pay at least, if not more, to Eastern. So one of the premises that it's the same reliability and it's less cost does not appear to be accurate. If they are to pay that additional cost to Eastern, it obviously affects the bottom line. The other thing I would just like to point out, and maybe Tom can answer this question, and that is that his demands have gone down in our urban water management plan by 50% over the next 25 years. His numbers are not based in the SANDAG numbers that we use. The modeling that we do comes from SANDAG. I don't know how he got to that 50% reduction with growth that's anticipated in that area, But Dr. Hanneman, when you're looking at the demand numbers, I think it's important for you to know that that is a substantial departure from where we see the demands being as well.
I'd be happy to answer that. The SANDAG model is an inaccurate way to forecast water demands in a rural area. So our demands are going down due to loss of agriculture. We have a very small population of people. The people aren't what drives water use, and the SANDAG model relies on population. So, but with regard to, I think that there, and I'll let Nick provide more clarity if need be, but when you characterize the nature of the Eastern supply reliability analysis by saying, well, if you need more money, you can buy it from water, you can buy it from Met, just at an extra cost. That wasn't the conclusion. I think they pointed out that over the history of every allocation at Met, they've never actually not delivered water. They just say it's going to cost you more. Met uses an economic means to get people to meet their allocation numbers. But that wasn't the basis of it. That my understanding of the basis, and Nick can nod his head or shake his head accordingly, is that they could meet all of our demands without having to take a tier 2 water draw at some point. And so that's an important distinction. And I just want to make sure that was clear. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, that's how I recall our analysis concluding under pretty much all allocation scenarios, drought conditions, and the growth that are anticipated. Again, we looked at Eastern reliability of providing and servicing Fallbrook-Rainbow, and in all cases, it was more than 100% reliable. But I'd be happy to go back and look at that analysis, bring in the right people, and have a conversation directly with you, Dr. Hanneman, or whoever, to make sure we're all on the same page with regards to our conclusions.
Yeah, and to clarify, like last drought, Rainbow was hit with a 36% mandate from the state. And so irrespective of whatever Met or anybody else had to say their reliability, didn't make any functional difference for us. So when Eastern tells our board that we can provide you 100% of your supply under any of these conditions, that's good enough. And for the cost difference that was currently killing our customers' agricultural businesses, that makes good sense for us.
Jack, do you want to go next? I see your hand up.
Sure. One quick thing too, I think that we need to be careful about. So when we look at supplies, we're sort of assuming that everyone's local supplies are more expensive. And that isn't always the case. And some of that is geography. So Eastern has a little bit of a different situation, being both a wholesale and retail supplier with access to groundwater. So I think we need to be careful about assuming that differential, the wholesale customers that use their infrastructure, is really a supply cost versus an infrastructure distribution cost. And you might want to dig in a little bit into their supply side. The reality with the water authority is, due to the nature of their arrangement as a wholesaler, where most of the retail agencies had the low cost supplies, the supplies by the water authority, like desal, for example, are very expensive, right? That, like you've looked at before. So for Fallbrook and Rainbow, if we wanted to participate in an in lieu way with Eastern, so if we wanted to participate in a groundwater supply project with Eastern, it's not $2,800 an acre foot water. It's a lower cost water supply. And Fallbrook, for example, that's 5,000, like you said, 40% on Met, similar to Rancho, California, that serves Temecula. If we did say, all right, we want another 2,000 acre feet, there would be opportunities to do that at a much lower cost. So the idea that we're suddenly going to be paying what we pay with the water authority, which is about $1,800 an acre foot, is their all-in cost rate, which is much higher than even the customers that are using Eastern's distribution system, really doesn't make sense. So that if the conclusion is, hey, you might want to secure additional supplies, that's something we could consider. But where we're at, especially from Fallbrook right now, we're pretty comfortable with the supply mix, being similar to, say, Rancho, California, with also ag, our ag demands being there available if we do need to do supply cutbacks. So that's, as you look at this going forward for a conclusion for Fallbrook Public Utility District, we feel pretty comfortable with that supply mix. And it is still out there if we did want to generate additional supplies at a slightly higher marginal cost. And you don't have to build the infrastructure to get it here. I mean, that's a key part of our agreement with Eastern, is sort of this in lieu concept. So we could develop projects with them in an in lieu concept on the met allocation. Similar to what happens with the water authority. I don't get desal water, but I have an in lieu agreement that theoretically benefits me.
Thanks, Jack. Is there anybody else at this point in time that has any questions or comments? Having seen none, I'll pass the baton back over to you, Dr. Hanneman, and let you conclude your presentation.
I think we're on the next slide, headed Delta Reliance. Yeah, so this is just pulling together some facts I've gone over. Since 2003, Met has relied on State Water Project water for about 63% of its supply, and the other 27% is Colorado River supply. Now that the QSA is in sort of full operation, say over the last 3 years, the authority relies on Met for about 38% of its water. You put those numbers together, and the result is the authority is implicitly, is relying on State Water Project for about a quarter of its water, using those two numbers. It gets 38% of water, 63% of which comes from the Delta. If Fallbrook and Rainbow switch to Eastern, they will be relying at present purely on Met water. Met water is 63% State Water Project water. And so there will be some increase in reliance on the Delta. It'll go from 24% of, if we look at next year's planned consumption, whatever it is, 17,000 acre foot for Fallbrook and Rainbow combined based on their urban water management plans. It'll go from 24% of 17,000 acre foot coming from the Delta to 63%. And I'm not saying that's large or small. I'm just saying that that's the number. And then the just a couple of things to round up. So if you go to the Delta. So I asked Adam to send around a memo last week, and it's aimed at the authority and Fallbrook and Rainbow primarily, and I'm just quoting some sentences from it. And this is the issue of an exit fee. And the first thing I'm saying is, I know there are disagreements or questions about whether LAFCO can recommend an exit fee. And that's above my pay grade. As I say, within the water world, there are precedents for that, but whether that's consistent with the enabling legislation and everything else, as I say, I don't know. But for this purpose, I want to focus on the question of, is there a sound economic justification for a departure fee? And what would the amount of the fee be, and what would some of the details be? Because obviously, the question of whether that is legally satisfactory can and probably would be litigated separately. And so it's kind of outside of this current venue. Next slide. If you can go to the next slide. So it seems to me that there is a valid case for some sort of fee, because a significant portion of the water received by Fallbrook and Rainbow from the authority is in fact water that the authority has arranged to purchase and has made a long-term commitment to pay for. The desalination water, I'm sorry, the QSA water, but it's also the case that the desalination water backs up the supply they get. So there's a real long-term commitment that the authority has made that has benefited Fallbrook-Rainbow up to now, and it's in the case of the QSA, it's ramped up since 2003. In the case of desal, it just started in whatever it is, 2015. But there is some commitment that the authority has made. Next slide. And so I wanted to, setting aside the issue of the legality, which obviously is a crucial one, but the other thing is, what should the fee be? Should it be a lump sum or an annual payment for 5 years, for 10 years, for 15 years, for longer? It should be tied to the financial commitment, should be tied to Fallbrook-Rainbow's appropriate share of financial commitments that the authority has made on their behalf. And what that share is and what are the relevant commitments, I'd like your thinking sort of collectively. So I thought that's the point of this. That's why I sent it to you. I can imagine different ways of answering these questions, but for a start, I'd like to know how you think of answering the questions. And so that's the point of this. That's basically all I have to say. The very last slide just describes what I plan on doing between now and the next meeting. And so just briefly, I've been interacting with the authority for some data relating to the rate impact. I'll get that data. I'll update my analysis. And just to remind you, I had done a single year analysis. I didn't account for reserves. I want to account appropriately for reserves. So part of the discussion is understanding how the reserves kick in. And the other is a multi-year analysis. And that also interacts with reserves because there's a time profile to the reserve needs. And that can make a one-year analysis different from the analysis of a run of years. So those are things I'm still understanding, and I need to tidy up for the rate impact analysis. With the supply reliability analysis, I've addressed it, Jack and others. You raised some issues that I need to look into. And I have, on the issue of the underlying reliability of Colorado River water and state water project water, I have been thinking about this and have material and haven't written this up. And just by the way, this is not a topic I'm new to. So for the California's climate assessment in 2008 and 2009, I produced the report on the impact of climate change on Southern California's urban water supply. So you said I should talk to Metropolitan. That's sense. I'm not sure who to talk to. So there's kind of a literature. I'm on emails. There's a person, John Flack, who has a blog that's widely cited. There are other people. I'm getting all this through my Arizona connection because, as I say, Arizona DWR has an email at least once a week on the Colorado. So the point is I've been getting that type of information. if this, but it certainly would make sense to chat with somebody in Metropolitan, via a Zoom or something. I don't know who, and of course they have to have the time. But if you'd like to look into that, I certainly would like to do that. It's kind of stupid for me not to talk to them. But you can't. I've been in their offices many times. I can't walk in the front door and ask the guy at the desk, could I talk to someone? So wrapping up the reliability, which is incomplete, and then on the exit fee. But let's see where we get. But the starting point, as I've just said, is I'd like to see the issues you raise about that in terms of not the legality, but the economic side. So I will have a full draft of my report for our meeting in September. It'll be a draft, and the idea is I'll get comments from you. There may be a few loose ends, but I'll revise it for our October meeting. And then it'll be sort of in with the LAFCO staff.
Thank you, Dr. Hanneman. I appreciate the presentation. Looks like we have a couple hands still raised for
Sure.
some questions and comments. Tom, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, just real briefly on that whole Delta Alliance thing. While mathematically that's an interesting way to look at it, I believe in the LAFCO records, Metropolitan has already indicated that the change in organization will require them to make 0 changes in their allocation of the state water project versus Colorado. And so, this is from a LAFCO question. The largest wholesaler in the state has indicated what the situation is going to be, that our demands, which are part of the Water Authority's met demands, just going to go from this wholesaler to that wholesaler, and it's still going to be a met demand irrespective. And so, but we can talk about it if you like, but it's not a really pertinent thing. And then on the exit fee, I think that as we've indicated before, the state law does indicate what the exit fee. Well, it doesn't say anything about exit fees. It talks about how the financial things to be wrapped up. I know that last month, General Manager Curl indicated that the Met water was more expensive than the QSA water. So then maybe we should get a credit.
Let me just make one comment. The statement that it's still going to be a Met demand is true at the present level of demand on the authority water, but it wasn't going to be true. I forget, within the next 10 years, based on the demand forecast that the authority staff put out, because of the falling off in demand, due to local supplies. That is to say, if the authority, if demand on the authority is lower, the amount of water needed from Met, goes down to less than 17,000 acre-foot, which is Fallbrook-Rainbow. So it's only if the demand on the authority is more than 17,000 acre-foot. The first thing that you can say, it's the same water. And the second thing is, the last 10,000 acre-foot that the authority takes from Met, isn't exclusively assigned to Rainbow or Fallbrook, as opposed to the other agencies. This is their operational needs, there are other agencies involved. So you can't necessarily say that if we depart with our 17,000 acre-foot, that would have come from Met if we stay in the authority, and it'll still come from Met, and it's no change. And it's no
well,
change.
I guess from the Water Authority's Urban Water Management Plan, at all times, even at 2035, when pure water really takes effect, they're still about 30,000 acre-feet above the baseline of their demands. That's in the Water Authority's planning documents, which is what we've been basing this on. One of the reasons it really isn't a thing, but the reason we're talking about it is there has been some CEQA claims brought up by the Water Authority, and even Fallbrook-Rainbow were both sued by Otay Water over CEQA when we first filed our applications. That lawsuit's long over with. And it's not really a CEQA thing. We're not going to be increasing impacts on the delta. We're going to be buying the same blend of water from Met either way. And so I think that from a LAFCO perspective, when you open up this sort of analysis, you put LAFCO staff and or geez, their counsel in a stickier wicket than is really required for this sort of reorganization.
Jack, I think your hand was up next if you want to proceed.
Yeah, so a couple quick things. I appreciate that outline, and one of the outcomes of this is the focus on, all right, if we leave the Water Authority secured desal and QSA supplies, that essentially the idea of that is they secured part of that for Fallbrook and Rainbow. We're leaving that. We need to continue to pay for it. One of the outlines of that would be it's water they don't want, right? So if the idea is there's this supply that's available to the Water Authority, well, if they want it, then they benefit from it and they pay for it. It's in the cost of water. There was no other investment that if we pay for it and still they use it, I'm a little confused about that. So what the obligation would be to say, Fallbrook-Rainbow, you need to pay for this water that had some benefit, reliability benefit or other benefit they wanted. We would pay for it, yet they would still have it and use it and gain that same benefit. So under that outline where you're saying, hey, we want you to pay something for these supplies, theoretically, then you could account for that as our supply. You know, to me, there's two options, right? One is if the Water Authority doesn't want these supplies going forward, some amount of them, and wants us to pay for them going forward, then okay, we don't really want it. We don't think we need it. But if that's the assessment of LAFCO, then you'd say, all right, well, then we'll have to buy this supply, pay for it. But then you could account for it like it is now. It would essentially be accounted for in our supply mix if that was the direction. I don't think that, that makes a ton of sense. I think the Water Authority would rather have those supplies themselves going forward, but I struggle to see us paying for it, yet them using it. That one to me is a little bit confusing. The other thing is the idea that the Water Authority has just enough water that if we leave, they can forecast within 17,000 acre feet. That's not what the past tells us. So if they're within that range right now, we need to think about what happens if we go below, and we need to be developing contingency plans for that today. And so one of those is what happens if the Water Authority goes below? And it's an interesting question for Med and the Water Authority. What happens to that QSA supply if the Water Authority can't take it? Does it go to Med? Who gets it? And so I think when you get to the Bay Delta conclusion that somehow if the Water Authority drops below, that then this water's lost, essentially. That's the conclusion, that the Med needs to buy more water from the State Water Project because this QSA water is gone. It's not available anymore to Met. It's disappeared. I think that's important to run to ground, because if that water basically gets reallocated to Med, then there's no net impact. It's just where that water is going. So I think that, whose water is that QSA water, right? If it doesn't go to the Water Authority, whose water is it? And what I would suggest is the reality is if we think we're going to drop below, we need to develop that strategy now in terms of how do we deal with that QSA amount. So
let me answer, if I may. I understand the point you're making, Jack. There is actually a crucial issue here, which is a difference between us. The issue is not the water. The issue is not if the authority is stuck with 17,000 acre foot that it can't sell to you and it's just kind of sitting there. That's not the issue. The issue is the money. This is a fixed cost. The water costs nothing, essentially, except for a power cost. It's the commitment to build, it's the commitment to pay Imperial, whatever it is, a year for 35 years. I'm not getting the exact numbers right. That's the cost. And likewise, the cost of lining the canal. This is all fixed cost. And so, and this fixed cost was incurred, looking to the future with 24 member agencies. And so if Fallbrook and Rainbow leave, the issue is not, does 17,000 acre foot just sort of sit there and evaporate or whatever? The issue is the remaining members have to pay more to cover the fixed cost of the water, because the authority is on the hook to make a stream of annual payments to Imperial. Imperial doesn't care whether the authority uses the water, or sort of lets it evaporate. The authority is on the hook to make a stream of payments. And if you have, if it has fewer members, then the other members each have to kick up more. That's the issue. What stream of payments? So, I mean, as an economist, I can imagine a future time when there's water marketing between the authority and Metropolitan, or between the authority and other retail agencies served by Metropolitan, and the authority can sell that water to, Claremont or whatever. And if Claremont needs a more reliable supply, they'd pay for that. And the water then would be sort of fully fungible, or the financing, the dollars would go with it. I do think that will happen. I think it would be good if that happened. I don't think that will happen in the next 5 years. I do think will have happened by 20 or 25 years from now. The point is, the point I'm trying to make is, you can think of this as an adjustment period. The authority has committed itself to a series of payments, which are divorced from the water, effectively, because if it doesn't, it's irrelevant whether it needs the water or not. And if there's an exit of some members, that just raises the payments that have to be made by everybody else. And so the question is, what are the payments? What period of time would be reasonable? In other words, think of this as a transition. And the authority is given a window of time, 5 years, 8, I'm making up the numbers, but a window of time to figure out how to, reconfigure its finances in this situation. What items are we thinking about? What is the time period? What is the share of Rainbow and Fallbrook in that amount? That's what I'm thinking of. But I'm looking to you to suggest answers at this point. But that's where I was coming from. It's really not the water, it's the fixed costs.
Yeah, so let me ask the question maybe a different way to think about it, because the nature of those contracts is a water purchase contract, the dollar per acre foot contract. So if we do this example, Fallbrook, as you showed, we're 8,000 acre feet a year, 4,000 acre feet is local supply, then 3,000 is TSAR, right? Which is specifically not allocated for QSA or desal, right? So you do that math, you've got about 1,000 acre feet a year associated with M&I demands on the water authority that would be supplied by, Med QSA water. So going forward, theoretically, you could say, all right, of this 1,000 acre feet, 60% would have been QSA if you were with the water authority. So you need to pay this amount to deal with the QSA water. What's preventing us from then just basically saying, all right, provide us that water? If we're going to pay for it, then there's no cost impact to everyone else if we just pay for it. What's the cost of it? We'll pay for it, right? Not that I want it, but if they don't want it, then we'll pay for it. There's nothing that would prevent that water then to be allocated, if that's what we're talking about. So if we're going to pay for it because other members don't want to pay for it, then why would we pay for it and then they would get allocated that supply? That's what I'm really confused on. Or if they don't want it, tell us what amount you don't want, and we'll start now trying to find someone else who does want it and see if we can't make it happen quicker than 20 years ago from now. If there's some amount of QSA or desal water that we're saying, hey, we don't want that level of commitment. So that's what I understand what you're saying, but I going forward, it would seem like if you're going to have us pay for water, then the situation is you could allocate that water the same way.
Let me just say one thing, and I know others want to speak. The key thing is if you're paying, and I forget what the loaded rate is for the authority, but I'll make up a number, $1,700 an acre foot, let's say. A big chunk of that is actually fixed cost, and there are other fixed charges you're paying for. In other words, the problem with water is these fixed costs. So if you sell me an acre foot of water for $1,000, most of the $1,000, a big chunk is actually paying for the fixed cost of infrastructure. And so if you don't use the molecule of water, that's fine, but I'm still paying for the debt on the infrastructure. That's all I'm saying. So again, I'm just trying to say in thinking through this, and there's a lot to be, this is sort of starting a conversation, you have to look at the fixed costs, which the authority is saddled with, and the variable cost of what you pay as an acre foot as a volumetric charge actually is in part the fixed costs that are part of the legacy of the authority. But I wanted actually a conversation between you and Tom and the authority and others. I'd like to pick through this in a thoughtful way. I realize the notion of an exit fee is controversial and is very novel. And so it requires careful thinking. It's not coming with a sledgehammer. It's fine. So I wanted to open a discussion about what are the fixed costs where you could say the authority is saddled with. What are the fixed costs you can say no, it's not really saddled with those in this case. And so it involves a level of detail that you all are more familiar with than I am. I mean, obviously I'll look at this, but that's why I wanted to, that's why I kind of asked for your thoughts on this, but I'll stop now. I know there are other people who need to talk.
Andy, just checking with you. Did you have your hand up or not? No. Gary?
Yeah, and I know lots of talk going around as far as nothing to see here, nice, simple, but I really do appreciate Dr. Hanneman's evaluation of this because it, to me, renews my my faith on how knowledgeable he is as he moves through the different areas, and he was definitely the right person to pick to jump into this because he does understand water and its issues, and just like the Chinatown movie, as far as what's worth fighting for versus what's drinking, it's very complex. But as we move forward, some of the things too to realize within the cost of whether it's the IID transfer, the canal lining, the desal water, all of the things that have done to look at regional impacts and benefits to our region as a whole. And all of us as being part of that planning, including the surveys that were done countywide and everything else, is that some of the costs associated even within those were mitigation costs, whether it be mitigation costs for the Salton Sea or environmental impacts, the even with Carlsbad, with the lagoon there. And I know some of the habitat restoration up in and around the Fallbrook area, or Rainbow and San Marcos, those areas, some of the habitat restoration and maintenance that's done that goes into that as well. So it's really very complex, and it's really very deep, and I appreciate Dr. Hanneman's view on it and sharing his insight.
Thanks, Gary. I think the last hand up is Keen.
Thank you, Adam. And again, thank you, Professor. I share Gary's comment that you have proven, Professor, to be a good choice for walking us through this process. So I have a couple of comments. They're actually more for the ad hoc and less for Dr. Hanneman. And so committee members, keep in mind that the commission wants all of you in some collective or individual form, and you know, staff and Adam and Holly, we're going to all work on the mechanics of how best to do that. But the end goal for us is, whether it's in September or October, that this committee goes on record as to say, the professor hit it out of the park on topics 1, 2, or 3, and or, you know, there's some, you know, some hybrid, you know, we're good with his conclusions on topic 1. We have some lingering questions on topic 2, and, you know, he's way on or way off on topic 3. Somehow we are expecting this committee to go on record as to what you think the reasonableness is of the professor's conclusions. So with that in mind, and this is in the form of a question, how does the committee want to proceed in getting this forthcoming report from the professor? At least in September, it looks like, and Professor, tell me if I'm off, that you will have complete thoughts on topics 1, supply, and topic 2, which is rate impacts. Okay, so, and then some preliminary thoughts on topic 3, which is departure fee. So, committee members, how do you want to receive this information? Do you want us to sync this so you have a report or a memo from the professor, you know, sufficiently in advance? Do you rather want us to have the professor do his presentation in step with releasing his report, and then come back at a second meeting and celebrate and or pick it apart? What would the committee think is most beneficial in how you all digest information? And maybe Adam, this would be a good time maybe to volunteer or check in with each member so we hear them on the record as to their thoughts on this. And since
Yeah, I'm
Kim's
more than happy to. Yeah, more than happy to do that. Sounds like Kimberly wants to volunteer first, like you said. So.
Yes, absolutely. I think it would be very helpful to get a report in advance so that I can read it and chew on it and maybe come both with some meaningful thoughts, and then maybe have any questions addressed at the actual meeting. That, at least for me, that would be most beneficial.
Tom?
That was just a thumbs up for what Kim said.
So you second that. Any other thoughts? Thumbs up from Lydia. Gary, Sandy, Nick.
Agree.
Sounds like I'm getting a lot of Rachel, do you have a comment or question?
If we got the report ahead of time, we had the meeting and then we asked the questions at the meeting and got our answers in that meeting, would be the timeline? Or would there be another conversation with follow-up? Or
yeah, this is so Adam, let me, because this is a great question, Rachel, because I'm kind of playing this out of my mind, and there's a couple of scenarios here. I'm envisioning a process coming up very soon in which the professor releases his report, kind of consistent with Kim's suggestion that it's in advance, and perhaps in advance means at least 2 weeks or something to that nature. We have a meeting, the professor's there to explain and take comments. And then after that, while Adam and me and LAFCO staff still are talking to professor, this ad hoc committee is not seeing the professor at the next meeting. And that's where we say to the group in some logical and in linear way, okay, topic 1, these assumptions, are you good, yes or no? Okay, his conclusion, are you good, yes or no? And we have a roll call vote to some degree, because I want to share with the commission, if it's in the minutes or in otherwise, this is the 10 members of the committee, this is where they fell on these 3 topics and some of the reasons why they fell on this side or otherwise. So in Adam, we may need to look at the timeline again, but perhaps our September meeting be pushed back towards the end of the month. And then, whether we see the professor at our next meeting or it's just the ad hoc and LAFCO staff, maybe that's a path.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's something we can completely answer today, just because I'm thinking on the top of my head as well. We are scheduled to meet next September 20th. I'm going to take a wild guess and suspect that Dr. Hanneman's not going to be able to provide a draft report in 2 weeks, which would be 2 weeks in advance of September 20th, unless he wants to correct me if I'm wrong and put in 12-hour days. But nonetheless, perhaps there is some wiggle room in the schedule to push that September meeting back a week or so, or even maybe push it to the beginning of October. And that would give him the needed time to prepare his draft analysis with those two topics essentially concluded, and give the committee some time to review before meeting in the beginning of October. And then I would imagine maybe condensing that window between the draft and the final, there might not be as much time needed in between. So I think we may have a little wiggle room. It's something I'd like to work with the professor, but I'm getting all indications from you and all the committee members that we would like some sort of document in advance of that next meeting, whether Dr. Hanneman participates or not, which could also be to be determined. But that's generally kind of what I'm feeling while I'm spitballing here. And so, Dr. Hanneman, is that something that seems reasonable from your end?
I understand why it would make much more sense for you to have a report in advance and read than what we've been doing. So in a way, if I could have till September 20th to produce the written report, because this is a cluttered week because I'm driving to Arizona and classes begin on Thursday. And so the rest of this week is just going to be craziness. If I could deliver the report on the 20th and then you meet on the 27th or 4th or whatever, it depends how much time, that would work. Because I was planning to have the thing written by the 20th. That would work.
Would a week review from all the committee members, is that sufficient enough time? It sounds reasonable, but just want to check with you guys if Keen.
So I think buffering in a little extra time makes sense. So LAFCO's next meeting is, and I say this because it's always important to make sure our council's schedule is available. So I know Holly is going to be thinking about LAFCO on October 4th, because that's our next commission meeting. If we could then perhaps schedule the next ad hoc meeting then for that afternoon, I know there's no issues then with the LAFCO side of it. And so then the question is, does that work with the majority of people's schedules on this end? And then also what it also allows, if we give an extra week, Sandy appropriately asked at the beginning of this process, well, what are we doing in terms of noticing the other 22 or so member agencies? It gives an extra amount of time for those other member agencies of the Water Authority to digest it. And I'm guessing, because the report will be out, we will have outside comments to be able to digest too. And I think just giving us, again, 3 weeks of advance notice will be helpful from the time we issue the report with a really nice layman's executive summary for us, Professor, and then debating the merits on the 4th. And then if the committee's ready, maybe we actually do some voting, or if the committee needs more time, then we cross that bridge with Adam's help.
Does any committee members have any comments to that, Sandy?
I think that would work. I would just ask that Dr. Hanneman be at the meeting on October 4th, because I'm going to assume there's going to be questions and comments, and it is a draft report. So I think it's important for him to hear those questions and comments before he finalizes his report.
No, mean, I can be present and just listen, or not, whatever, but I'm available. And if you meet in person, and who knows, I can be present. But I want to be available to you as much as possible.
And if LAFCO's meeting is in the morning of October 4th, I would suspect, I don't know if everybody can check their calendar, but obviously this meeting would start in the afternoon.
Yeah, ideally 1 o'clock. And
yep.
The professor triggered a separate question for Holly. Holly, I know we are due to meet in person for the first time on October 4th. What say you with respect to how this group would need to meet in terms of whatever the governor's orders are right now?
Right. The governor's order that allows us to meet virtually is scheduled to lift on September 30. So we would need to meet in person unless a new order comes out extending it.
Or we then meet, then instead of meeting on the 4th, we meet on the 30th.
That's right. We could meet virtually on the 30th.
Which is a Saturday. That might be challenging, or maybe that Friday. Well, you know, Adam, I think the dynamics of trying to get 10 people plus people's staff in a room might be difficult on October 4th, let alone these side issues about people meeting in particular in the county building right now on October 4th. There may be some challenges for people. So maybe we'll tentatively set it for October 4th, but maybe you could help drill that down on an alternative, because I know the county's going to have some restrictions on who's walking in their building.
Yeah. Okay. And it makes, you know, it's with the Delta variant, things are changing so quickly too. So I would like to kind of lock something in that we all agree to.
Can I show the 30th being on a Thursday?
Yeah, September 30th being a Thursday, that seems to work. It would give, what's that, a 10-day window for review, both for the ad hoc committee members and any other outside member agencies.
Adam, for the Water Authority, we are booked on that day in DC. Unless that changes, obviously, we don't know yet.
I would err on having more time. So as I think this out, just meeting in advance before the 4th is going to not meet the goals of giving everyone enough time to digest this, and in particular doing our noticing to the 22 other member agencies. So I guess we're just going to have to figure out, you know, how to do the in-person meeting. I think the only people who need to be physically in the room are the ad hoc committee members. So selfishly, me, Michael, and Adam, and the LAFCO staff could, you know, be on the TV while everyone is enjoying their company. But I think, Adam, let's just we'll drill down on it in person.
Yeah, let's just tentatively hold it on everybody's calendar that Dr. Hanneman provides the draft report September 20th, let's tentatively put a hold on all our calendars to meet in person the afternoon of October 4th, with the caveat knowing that things could change at the state and the governor that may extend our ability to meet online. And if that should not be the case and it should lift, then I can work individually and electronically with all of you of what those details would be for October 4th. Okay, well, I'm seeing a lot of head nodding and no other hands up for any questions or comments. That does conclude that item of business. It is an informational item only, so no action is needed. I do want to quickly check with our staff at LAFCO, since this is a public meeting, if there were any comments that were submitted prior to the meeting for this item, and also if there were any members of the public that submitted comments during the meeting.
No pre-registered speakers were received.
And so far, no live email comments.
Tammy and Erica, thank you so much. So that concludes item 5B. I know we are outside our 2-hour window, so I will try to speed this up as quickly as I can. I think the next couple items will take only a handful of minutes, but let's continue on to item 5C, which is the Executive Office report. Our advisory committee will receive an update on the current municipal service review for the Fallbrook-Rainbow region and its coordinated review with the reorganization proposals. Instead of Keen, I think Priscilla Allen with LAFCO staff is going to provide the quick update on this, and so I will toss it over to her.
Yes, thank you, Adam, and good afternoon, committee members. We are currently in the process of reviewing the edits and comments that we've received back from both agencies. So we've received those this past week, and then we'll continue to review and update as needed, and then coordinate with both Jack and Tom. So that's all I have for you all.
Sandy?
When will we see that report?
That's a good question. We're hoping on our calendar, we have something going to the commission in draft form in October. So we're assuming we will provide a draft of at the same time to the ad hoc committee as information only. I would assume that your member agencies or subject agencies, I should say, will be where you'll want to provide comments, but as an ad hoc, we'll provide it as simply as an informational item. And then just relatedly, I do want to note, because Tom asked a relevant question that I should share, because Linda is going on full maternity leave, perhaps as we speak, Priscilla is taking over the bulk of the role as project manager, and I appreciate that very much. Thank you, Priscilla.
Thank you for your report, Priscilla. I don't see any other hands for any questions or comments. This item is also informational only, so no action is needed, but I will check one more time with Tammy and Erica just to check if there are any pre-registered comments on this item and any other members of the public that have submitted comments during said meeting.
No pre-registered speakers received.
And no live email comments.
Thank you. And that concludes item 5C. We will condense this and move to items 5D and 5E. I think they've been discussed, but it was just a future schedule reminder. Just real quickly, I think tentatively Dr. Hanneman will provide the report September 20th, the draft, and then tentatively just put a hold on all your calendars for October 4th, Monday at 1 p.m. And if there's any other commission members that have anything to add to the future agenda, now would be the time to contribute. Having seen none, that will conclude items 5D and 5E. And I want to Tom, oh, you snuck one in there.
I was a little too late on that. Perhaps we can have, just for the benefit of some of the members of this ad hoc committee, have Keen or someone with LAFCO walk through what are the frameworks for decision making that the commission will make, so that recommendations from this ad hoc committee will be, aligned with those sorts of things. What are the LAFCO relevant policies, that are used to evaluate these sorts of proposals, just so the members of this committee can have that as a backdrop as they consider the report from the professor and provide feedback on that for use by the commission.
Tom, no problem. We can incorporate that into the next discussion and next agenda and have that information available. So I do want to thank everybody for their participation today. I apologize, it's gone a little long-winded, but I think it was a very good spirited debate. Thank you, Dr. Hanneman, for your presentation. I think there's a lot of good information and dialogue that was back and forth today. And as always, I will be more than happy to facilitate any future communication that any of the member agencies or ad hoc committee members that would like to contribute to the ongoing dialogue and conversation and subject matter, and would be more than happy to set up with anything with myself and Dr. Hanneman at this point in time. I think you all know how to get a hold of me. So at this point in time, our meeting is adjourned Monday, August 16th at 12:34, and have a great rest of your Monday. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.